During the annual crab migration, Christmas Island turns into a sea of red. Millions of bright crimson crabs pour from the rainforest, covering roads, bridges, and forest floors in a living, moving carpet. It's one of the most mesmerizing sights in nature, a spectacle so incredible that even Sir David Attenborough called it one of the most memorable moments of his career. But paradise is under threat. For decades, a tiny invader has been silently decimating these crabs, turning this isolated island into a battlefield. The red crabs, once rulers of the forest floor, were being wiped out at alarming rates. And the worst part? The invaders weren't even the size of a finger. They were small, frenzied, and armed with a weapon strong enough to bring a million-pound ecosystem to its knees. Scientists tried conventional methods, poison baits, helicopters dropping insecticides, endless hand labor, but nothing stopped the relentless assault. The island's delicate balance teetered on the edge, and the iconic crab migration was at risk of disappearing forever. Then, something almost invisible to the human eye arrived. Tiny warriors, no bigger than a grain of rice, were released into the wild. And what happened next stunned everyone, proving that sometimes the smallest creatures can decide the fate of an entire island. This isn't just a story about crabs, it's a story about survival, resilience, and the extraordinary power of nature's tiniest heroes. Christmas Island sits alone in the vast Indian Ocean, a tiny speck of land 217 miles south of Java and 1,600 miles northwest of Perth, Australia. It's essentially an underwater mountain rising nearly 3 miles from the ocean floor, yet only the top 1,180 feet break the surface. This isolation turned it into a tropical paradise wrapped in dense rainforest, a place where evolution had millions of years to work its magic. Over time, creatures here developed in ways found nowhere else on Earth. Among them, the red crabs stand out, not just for their vivid crimson shells, but for the role they play in the very heartbeat of the island. These crabs aren't just inhabitants, they are ecosystem engineers. They dig burrows, process fallen leaves, turn the soil, and keep the forest alive. Without them, the rainforest wouldn't breathe the way it does. For most of the year, crabs live solitary lives underground. But when the wet season arrives between October and November, something extraordinary happens. Millions emerge simultaneously in a perfectly synchronized spectacle. Males rush to the coast first, digging intricate burrows in the sand. Females follow days later, selecting the best burrows for mating. Each female can carry up to 100,000 eggs, ready to be released in the ocean during the last quarter moon. At dawn, they surge toward the water, releasing their eggs in a synchronized dance. The eggs hatch almost instantly, sending tiny larvae into the sea, where they spend the next month before returning as miniature crabs to continue the cycle. During this migration, the ground literally turns red. Roads close, residents sweep and rake pathways to protect the crabs, and tourists from around the world gather to witness nature's spectacle. It's a display of life, precision, and resilience, an ancient rhythm of the rainforest that has endured for millennia. But as breathtaking as this migration is, paradise was about to face a threat the crabs had never encountered, one that could turn this extraordinary scene into a story of mass devastation. For most of the 20th century, Christmas Island thrived in isolation. But then, a new force arrived, one so small it barely drew attention at first. The yellow crazy ants, tiny but relentless, somehow hitched a ride on supply ships, probably from Southeast Asia, though their exact origin remains a mystery. On their native lands, these ants were kept in check by predators and environmental limits. On Christmas Island, however, nothing stood in their way. Freed from natural enemies, they spread like wildfire, forming super colonies that sprawled across hundreds of acres. These weren't ordinary ant nests, they were massive underground cities housing billions of ants, all working as a single, terrifying organism. In some areas, one colony alone stretched over 1,850 acres. Scientists estimated that in the densest zones, more than 1,000 ants occupied every single square meter. When these supercolonies encountered the red crabs, the results were catastrophic. Tens of millions of crabs fell victim to the tiny invaders. The migration routes, once a spectacle of crimson life, became death zones. Tourists expecting to see a sea of crabs instead found scattered, lifeless bodies on the forest floor. For decades, the delicate balance of Christmas Island's rainforest had been disrupted in a matter of years, all by creatures barely visible to the human eye. Attempts to fight back with poison bait provided only temporary relief. The ants would retreat, then surge back from untreated areas, re-establishing supercolonies even larger than before. It became clear that conventional methods would never fully solve the problem. Something more ingenious and far more precise would be required to save the island and its iconic red crabs. The stage was set for a battle unlike any other, where the tiniest warriors of nature would become the unlikely heroes. The yellow crazy ants may look harmless, but appearances are deceiving. Watch them for a moment, and you'll notice their frantic, erratic movements, darting in every direction as if possessed. They earned their name for a reason. But what really makes them deadly isn't their speed. It's their weapon, formic acid. This acid is one of nature's most powerful toxins. When a red crab wanders into an ant supercolony, the attack is swift and merciless. The ants swarm, targeting the crab's eyes first, blinding it and stripping away its sense of direction. Then they attack the joints of its legs, immobilizing it completely. Paralyzed and disoriented, the crab can do nothing as thousands of tiny attackers tear it apart. The acid doesn't just kill individuals, it acts like a toxic gas. A captured crab's burrow becomes a death trap as the fumes linger and suffocate any crabs nearby. Within 24 hours, the colony's reach can wipe out every red crab in the vicinity. The scale of devastation is staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that 10 to 15 million crabs died from ant attacks, nearly a third of the island's population. Migration routes, once the crown jewel of the rainforest, were transformed into grisly corridors of death. Humans tried to intervene. Starting in 2001, park rangers spread poison bait called Anto, containing fipronil, a neurotoxin lethal to ants. Helicopters dropped it from the air, workers laid it by hand, and for a brief moment, the supercolonies faltered. But it was a temporary victory. Ants from untreated areas would simply recolonize, restoring the supercolonies to their former strength. The battle seemed endless, and the ants' deadly efficiency proved that conventional methods alone couldn't save the red crabs. It became painfully clear, to protect Christmas Island's iconic crabs and its fragile rainforest, scientists would have to think smaller, smarter, and far more creatively. The solution wouldn't be brute force. It would come from understanding the ants' own secret weakness. The devastation didn't stop with the crabs. As the red crab population plummeted, the rainforest began to unravel. The forest floor, once a vibrant patchwork of crimson movement and processed leaf litter, turned into a gray wasteland. Fallen leaves piled up unchecked, seedlings grew wildly into dense thickets, and entire sections of the rainforest choked under the weight of unprocessed vegetation. Birds that relied on crabs to disturb the leaf litter struggled to find food. Small reptiles vanished under the acid-spraying ant hordes. Even the soil itself began to lose its balance as the crabs no longer turned it over, letting nutrients stagnate. The ecosystem, fine-tuned over millions of years, was collapsing in a matter of decades. The impact reached humans, too. The annual crab migration wasn't just a spectacle, it was the lifeblood of local tourism. Hotels, restaurants, and tour operators depended on visitors flocking to witness the island's crimson invasion. As crab numbers fell, so did revenue, and the cultural pride of Christmas Island's residents began to fade along with the crabs themselves. Traditional control measures, poison bait, hand removal provided temporary relief, but the cycle of ant resurgence continued. The ants weren't just an invasive species, They were ecosystem engineers in reverse, reshaping the island into a hostile, almost alien landscape. Every year without a solution brought the red crabs closer to the brink, and with them, the rainforest itself teetered on the edge of collapse. It was clear that conventional methods could no longer protect this fragile paradise. To save the red crabs and everything that depended on them, scientists would need a solution that struck at the very heart of the ants' power. And that meant thinking far smaller than anyone had imagined.
Scientists realized that fighting the yellow crazy ants head-on was a losing battle. Poison bait and manual removal were temporary fixes at best. To truly save the red crabs, they needed to understand what fueled the ants' incredible power. And what they discovered was surprising. The ants weren't acting alone. The secret lay in another tiny invader, yellow lac scale insects. These inconspicuous bugs latch onto trees, feeding on sap and secreting a sweet liquid called honeydew. To the ants, this honeydew was pure gold. It became the fuel for their sprawling supercolonies, the energy that powered billions of ants working as one relentless force. In a way, the ants were farming the scale insects, protecting them from predators and ensuring a constant supply of sugary nourishment. Cut off from this food source, the ants' dominance quickly crumbled. Studies showed that when ants were separated from scale insects, their activity on the forest floor dropped by 95% in just 4 weeks. Their colonies weakened, reproduction slowed, and their terrifying grip on the island faltered. The revelation was clear. Controlling the scale insects could indirectly control the ants. But how? The answer lay in nature itself. Every species has enemies, predators, parasites, or diseases that keep populations in check. In their native habitats, yellow lac scale insects were kept under control by tiny natural predators. On Christmas Island, those predators were missing. Without them, both the scale insects and the ants could run wild. The solution became obvious, but delicate. Find the natural enemy of the scale insects and bring it to the island. Restore the balance nature intended. It was a bold idea, requiring years of research, careful testing, and an understanding that a single mistake could make the problem worse. This wasn't just a fight against ants, it was a battle for the survival of an entire ecosystem. And the heroes of this story would be so small that most people wouldn't even notice them at first glance.
The search for a solution led scientists halfway around the world to Malaysia, where they discovered a tiny predator that could turn the tide. A parasitic wasp barely 2 millimeters long, known as Tacardia summer. To the naked eye, it looked almost invisible, yet its impact on the scale insects, and ultimately the ants, was enormous. This wasp is a specialist killer. It doesn't sting humans, it doesn't build nests, and it doesn't harm native wildlife. Its sole purpose is to find yellow lac scale insects, lay eggs inside them, and let its larvae feed on the host from the inside out. Once the new wasps emerge, they immediately seek out more scale insects, repeating the cycle endlessly. One single wasp can parasitize more than 150 scale insects over its lifetime. Before bringing this tiny warrior to Christmas Island, scientists had to be absolutely certain it would be safe. Extensive field tests in Malaysia exposed the wasps to closely related scale insect species, and in every case, the wasps ignored them completely. They were precision hunters, focused solely on the invasive scales. Tests even confirmed that the wasps would attack scale insects even when swarmed by protective yellow crazy ants. Nothing could stop them from their mission. This tiny creature carried the potential to save an entire ecosystem. By targeting the scale insects, it would starve the ant supercolonies of their essential food source, weakening them from within. It was a strategy built not on brute force, but on nature's own precision engineering, letting a minuscule predator restore balance to an island under siege. The next challenge was enormous, bringing these tiny assassins to Christmas Island, breeding them in the millions, and releasing them across the island's sprawling ant supercolonies. It was a plan that would require patience, precision, and unwavering faith in the power of the smallest creatures. With the tiny assassin wasps identified, the next step was almost as delicate as the insects themselves. In December 2016, a team of scientists and park rangers flew to Malaysia and carefully collected 167 wasps, packaging them in secure vials for the journey to Christmas Island. An officer from the Australian Department of Agriculture accompanied the team, ensuring the fragile cargo survived the trip, and, almost miraculously, nearly all did. Once on the island, the challenge shifted to breeding millions of these tiny predators. Park rangers built custom enclosures while scientists guided every step, ensuring perfect temperature, humidity, and a steady supply of yellow lax-scale insects for the wasps to parasitize. Specific vegetation was planted to attract and sustain the scale insects, creating ideal nurseries where the wasps could reproduce rapidly. The release strategy was carefully planned. Half of the wasps were sent straight to the front lines, active ant supercolonies where scale insects were most abundant. These frontline wasps began their work immediately, laying eggs inside the scales and slowly cutting off the ants' food supply. The other half were kept in enclosures to build larger populations, ensuring a continuous wave of predators could be released over time. Monitoring stations were established across the island. Scientists measured ant numbers per square meter, tracked scale insect populations, and watched closely for any unexpected side effects. Every data point mattered. The process was gradual, cautious, and meticulous, because rushing the releases could jeopardize the delicate balance of the island's ecosystem. Biological control isn't instant. It requires patience, precision, and trust in nature's own systems. The tiny wasps were deployed, and then the waiting began, a test of time and faith as the fate of Christmas Island's red crabs hung in the balance.
The first signs of change were subtle, almost imperceptible. For months after the initial wasp releases, scientists monitored ant populations across the island, carefully recording every shift. Then, slowly but unmistakably, patterns began to emerge. In some areas, ant numbers plummeted dramatically. One survey site that had once teemed with 700 ants per square meter now had barely 10. The supercolonies that had dominated the forest floor for decades were weakening. As the ants faltered, the red crabs returned. Males dug burrows in territories that hadn't seen crabs for decades. Females followed, and by the next migration season, tens of millions of crabs were back on the move. In 2017, the annual migration counted 40 to 50 million adult crabs, signaling the first signs of real recovery. Over the following years, the results became even more remarkable. By 2024, the red crab population had more than doubled, swelling to an estimated 100 million. The annual migration had returned in full force, vivid, unstoppable, and spectacular. Roads closed, volunteers cleared paths, and tourists from around the world once again came to witness the crimson wave. The impact extended far beyond the crabs. Forest floors cleared, leaf litter was processed, seedlings balanced naturally, and plant diversity began to rise. Birds, lizards, frogs, and small mammals all found their habitats recovering. Even human agriculture saw benefits. Fruit trees thrived as scale insect populations dropped, thanks to the diligent work of the parasitic wasps. It was a triumph of patience, precision, and biology itself. Tiny wasps, barely visible without a magnifying glass, had begun to undo decades of devastation wrought by one of the world's most destructive invasive species. Christmas Island's rainforest, long suffocated under the weight of ant supercolonies and unprocessed leaf litter, was breathing again. Yet the battle was far from over. While some areas flourished, other remote regions still harbored dense ant colonies. Continued monitoring, targeted interventions, and occasional poison baiting remained necessary. The goal wasn't eradication, it was control, maintaining a balance where the red crabs and the ecosystem could thrive.
Even with millions of red crabs returning and the forest showing signs of life, the battle against the yellow crazy ants isn't over. Christmas Island's rugged terrain, steep cliffs, dense rainforest, and remote valleys makes total eradication impossible. Ant supercolonies still hide in inaccessible areas, safe from both poison bait and parasitic wasps. Complete elimination was never the goal. The aim was control, to keep ant populations low enough that native species could thrive. Scientists continue to refine their strategies. In 2021, plans emerged to introduce another wasp species from Africa, one that could target the ants more directly. But with every new intervention comes risk. Introducing another species requires careful study to avoid repeating past ecological mistakes. Every action must be precise, measured, and backed by years of research. Ongoing vigilance is key. Park rangers monitor ant numbers year-round, ready to respond when populations spike. The work is continuous, but the results are undeniable. Red crab numbers have soared from around 45 to 50 million in 2015 to over 100 million today. Forests once choked by leaf litter now breathe freely. Plant diversity is increasing, invasive snails are declining, and native birds, lizards, and small mammals are reclaiming their habitats. Christmas Island has become a living example of what careful, science-driven biological control can achieve. It's a story of patience, collaboration, and trust in the smallest members of the ecosystem. Tiny wasps, unnoticed by most, have restored balance to an island under siege. The lesson extends far beyond this remote paradise. Invasive species threaten ecosystems worldwide, and traditional short-term solutions like poison often aren't enough. Sometimes the answer isn't bigger, stronger, or louder. Sometimes the key to saving an ecosystem lies in creatures so small that they could almost be overlooked, but whose impact can be enormous. The story of Christmas Island isn't just about crabs or ants. It's about balance, resilience, and the incredible power of the smallest creatures. Millions of red crabs now march across the island once more, reclaiming territories lost for decades. Forest floors are alive again, leaf litter is processed, seedlings thrive in balance, and countless species, from birds to lizards to small mammals, are finding their homes restored. All of this happened because scientists looked beyond brute force and found a solution in nature itself. Tiny parasitic wasps, barely visible to the human eye, took on the ants' supercolonies and began restoring the island's fragile ecosystem. It's a reminder that size doesn't determine impact. Sometimes the smallest warriors can change the fate of an entire world. The work isn't finished. The yellow crazy ants still persist in remote corners, and constant vigilance is required to maintain control. But the recovery of the red crabs, the forest, and the entire ecosystem proves that careful, patient, and well-researched interventions can succeed without the need for drastic, destructive measures. Christmas Island shows us a lesson that resonates far beyond its shores. Ecosystems are delicate, interconnected, and worth protecting. And sometimes, saving the natural world doesn't require giants. It requires tiny, precise, and determined allies. So the next time you see a small insect or a tiny creature, remember this: even the smallest life can hold the fate of the largest worlds in its grasp. Nature's smallest heroes are often the ones who save us all.